Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin can and string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from the numerous podcasts that he is now a part of, along with working for Cold Omaha, Cover 32. He is Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing this Monday night?
I'm doing all right. Would have done better if the Falcons had won by just a little bit more, but otherwise pretty happy.
Are we doing one of those like Al Michaels hint to the over sort of thing?
Well, I'm just saying that I was pretty sure that the Falcons were going to win by more than 6, and a lot of people were sure that the Falcons would not win by at least 6, and I was on the wrong side of that assurance.
That is just too bad. You know who I would have liked to see is that Devonta Freeman run for a touchdown. I would have liked to have seen that stopped, as opposed to the Tampa Bay player just giving up on the play and being the last person to run by. That's what I'm upset about.
But you wouldn't have been upset if, say, another player had scored that touchdown. Say if it was Tevin Coleman instead.
No, if it would have been Coleman, I would have been they would have been perfectly fine with me. Just anyone but that one player who decided to run for more than 150 yards and a touchdown. That's all. No big deal. Well, welcome back to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. We've got lots to talk about, including the victory over the Bengals. We are the NFC North champs once again. And we've got lots of cool things to talk about. But before we start, just a quick note that we are just based off of you guys as far as ad revenue and all of that. We do not advertise any other products on this show. It is just simply from you guys. If you hear value in this show, you can help us out by telling a friend about Norse Code. You can even see our apparently, I don't know, did we pay CBS to include Norse Code on the broadcast right before
we were just so popular that they decided to include it. Keys
like
to the
that.
Vikings.
Keys to the Vikings. Code. Listening to Norse Code. I like that. So if you enjoy the show, you can give us a couple of bucks at paypal.me/NorseCode or go to patreon.com/NorseCode and you can donate there. Again, anything you'd like to give this holiday season is always appreciated. We put out 2 shows every week. Next week, we will be releasing our Christmas episode, including our outtakes and best of moments from the year. If you have something you would like us to feature in that, please send us a quick Twitter message or send us a quick email, norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, and I will take a look at it and see what I can do. There have been multiple requests for a compilation of Arif's Carson Wentz takes. I am only going to do some preseason stuff. There's way too much show to comb through in order to do that. But we did get 2 donations this week. Bradley Knight sends us in from Patreon. Again, thank you, Bradley. And Sam Ward gives a quick message saying that I was going to give more, but Dusty's Star Wars takes made me reconsider. In all seriousness, thank you for your hard work on a great podcast. Happy holidays.
Wow, that totally makes sense. Also, having just seen The Last Jedi and having enjoyed it, it feels like Dusty's takes are really just going to be disposed in the trash bin of history. He's on the wrong side here.
About so many things. Again, if you guys like the show, you can go ahead and download us. You can send us off to friends. Be like, hey, I listened to this cool show. Tell your coworkers about Norse Code. Tell them you saw the advertisement about us on CBS Sports. Do whatever you got to do. But we are the NFC North champs, or at least the Minnesota Vikings are, and we will be moving on to the playoffs this year. Yay! It's all about seeding now. And breaking news. Green Bay is out of the playoff run, correct?
Yeah, officially they moved from a less than 1% chance to a no % chance. They're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs.
Excellent news. This matters because the question is now whether or not to play Aaron Rodgers in the Vikings game coming up on Saturday. And they have said publicly they are open to the idea of benching him for the rest of the season. Now that they are playing for nothing, would the smart move be to rest Aaron Rodgers, who admittedly was only about 80% healed from his collarbone injury?
Right. So I was actually talking to a couple of people about him playing last week, and some people who I respect their football opinions, but I don't know anything about their medical opinions, as well as some people whose medical opinions I do respect because they have medical degrees and are practicing doctors. I've asked them about this. One guy says, you're either healed or you're not healed with a bone injury, and if he's out there, he's healed. And I was like, that sounds profoundly dumb. That doesn't seem right. And I asked, a doctor. I was like, that seems dumb, right? And the doctor was like, well, I mean, in the sense that partially healed means you're not healed, yes. You're either healed or you're not healed. But I wouldn't be surprised if with the playoff hopes on the line, that a team puts a critical quarterback out there. If the performance difference merited it, which in this case obviously it did, to put them in the playoffs. If they hadn't completely healed by the time it was time. And I hadn't heard the 80% thing. It must have been like, is this like a post game quote from Rodgers or something?
It was something that was circling around before the game. I believe it was on Saturday that this was coming out.
Okay, well then, yeah. And then in that case, it makes sense because until the bone completely, I guess, recalcifies or something, obviously you're at pretty high risk of re-injury. And this happens a lot with collarbones. We saw this happen. The most often I've seen this, or the thing that comes up the most often in my mind is Ryan Matthews, currently an unemployed running back, formerly running back for the Eagles, and before that running back for the Chargers, constantly had his collarbone injured. As well as, a couple of other injuries. He's a pretty injury-prone guy. But, this has happened actually throughout football, where collarbones tend to get re-injured. It seems like a little bit more often than other bones, because though you can detect the damage on like an x-ray or something like that, it can feel healed, before it actually is. Which is not to say it's a tricky one, because you can detect it. But, players might push to play before they're fully healed. And we've seen bones, players rush back from bone injuries too soon. The story I remember, because it pertained to some research I was doing about Adrian Peterson's recovery from injury way back in 2012, was the story about Jerry Rice, who had it was an ACL or some ligament damage that in order to heal it, they had to put 2 screws in his kneecap. And he rushed back from injury and re-fractured his kneecap because his bones hadn't fully healed yet. So this is a thing that happens. And so I would say if he was only 80%, ready, and, he took some hits in that game, and he clearly wasn't biomechanically completely all there, it would make the most sense to just sit him.
And McCarthy had said in the press conference today that Rodgers is super sore because he took a bunch of hits he didn't need to take, or he shouldn't have had to take. So knowing
is that calling Rodgers out or calling the offensive line?
That's got to be
calling Rodgers out for rushing onto the field, or
no? That's got to be offensive line going. Yeah, he took a bunch of hits he shouldn't have been taking, as he looks right over at his barely cohesive unit of offensive linemen. I just assume the Three Stooges music starts whenever they walk into a room. It's a nice theme song.
You're right, yeah.
So Packers may be without Aaron Rodgers for this Saturday. Haven't decided how I feel about that, but all I really want to have happen is a Vikings win. So I really don't care. Though it would kind of be fitting to to see Barr finish the job sort of thing. Not in a malicious way, just that ends up being the hit that ends it, and going, oh really? This is how it ends for the Packers?
Right. Right. There's a lot of Vikings fans that, it's a totally it's a sporting opinion where they're like, it's just a better game if Rodgers is in there. And I would like to beat the Packers with Rodgers just so Packers fans don't have the excuse of saying oh, Rodgers isn't even playing or whatever. I just want the victory to be complete and total. And I get that. But I just like winning. It doesn't really matter to me sort of how worth it. Or how meaningful it is after a win. After a loss, I'm totally willing to like hedge bets and be like, well, at least the defensive line looked good and you can build around that. But after a win, I'm just like, yeah, we won. Who cares how bad they were? Of course, I'm going to hedge that right now by saying there's not going to be a ton of Bengals analysis this week because the Bengals quit. Which is not right. Which is not to say the win doesn't count or it doesn't feel good. Both of those things are true. It just doesn't like impact our player analysis that much. And so, if the Vikings go off and have, and the defense runs wild and Hundley, we can say, yeah, that doesn't tell us much about the defense. We know the defense is good based off of like 14 other weeks of play, but that doesn't tell us much about the defense. That's fine, but I'll feel good beating the Packers kind of regardless.
Yeah, and realistically, at this point, this is all about seeding. So we really shouldn't be that picky about how we get our wins at this point. We have 2 more games left after this. We have the Packers and then we have Chicago. And Chicago should be beatable. And the Packers should definitely be beatable with Huntley back there. So we'll see. I read a funny tweet from, I believe it was Aaron Gleeman, Twins blogger, who said, I don't know if or was it might have been Kevin Seifert, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, who had said something along the lines of, I don't know if the Vikings should be happy about the idea of Rodgers not playing. The Vikings have more wins in Lambeau against Rodgers than they do against Seifert, or against than they do against Huntley. I had to sit there for a second and went, wait.
That's funny, though.
Oh, and then you do the, well, obviously,
right?
What we have here, yeah. So, 2000s, memes aside, the Vikings are now in the driver's seat. We are firmly in the number 2 position, and it may be difficult for us to get the number 1 spot, but it is still possible. But we have a game to talk about, and the first thing I want to mention is Case Keenum carving up the defense. Especially on that first drive, it almost looked like we were unstoppable, and that no one was going to be taking out Diggs or McKinnon for most of the game. No one was covering him for most of the game, it felt like.
Yeah, honestly, so I don't think... so here's a screaming hot take that people wouldn't expect from me. I don't think Keenum did all that much, which you're great. But that throw to Diggs was phenomenal. It was the best throw of either quarterback in the game, which isn't saying much, but you could probably stack up actually a couple of Vikings games and say that's the best throw we've seen in a couple of those Vikings games. So that's good, right? That was a really good throw to Diggs. But yeah, Diggs carved them up. McKinnon carved them up. It really felt like, I felt like no one was covered. Like, it wasn't just like Diggs or McKinnon. It felt like
upon rewatching it, I was shocked, especially when I looked at the all 22 of just how open Diggs was the whole game.
Right. Yeah. And so this is kind of the thing that I find interesting about Diggs is that if you go through the all 22 the past couple of games, Diggs actually gets open kind of a lot because they're shading coverage to Adam Thielen. So Diggs is, one-on-one in man coverage, sometimes against their second best corner, or, maybe even their best corner, depending on how they play coverages. But sometimes against their second best corner, and he just like cracks open and he doesn't get the ball or whatever, which is like fine. Thielen gets the ball and that's a completion. But in this game, Diggs is just wide open. And it really felt like they weren't covering him. I know that they had a defender fall down a couple of times on Diggs routes. It was wild. There were a couple of times McKinnon was left completely uncovered, both of them for really big gains. In the first half, we saw McKinnon on a wheel route. Literally just no one had him. And, I remember watching that and being like, well, it's the right decision. It's the right throw. And he gets 30 yards. It feels kind of weird. That it's just so perfunctory, like 30 yards. Yeah, you got to make those 30-yard throws, buddy. Like, it was just so weird.
that's just an odd, thing to be saying aloud right like that.
Yeah, right. Got to make those. God,
it's like telling a kicker, you got to be hitting those 60-yarders. Like,
yeah, right. Got to make a 45-yard field goal. There's like 20 people in the world who can consistently do that.
Shout out to Bomani and Jones.
Yeah. but yeah, and McKinnon was open on a screen pass later in the game. That's the one that Kyle Carter was also wide open on, and then he had to collapse back down to do a block. And it was a poor block, but McKinnon still gained like 25 yards. So it doesn't really matter. The first play of the game, or the first real big gainer might have been a Latavius Murray catch and run for 28 yards. Something like that.
Yeah, because the first play of the game was the weird sack that Keenum took.
Oh yeah,
he looked like he tripped and fell, but it was either that or it was a light tug. It was the sort of fall that you expect in like soccer.
Right. And so I tracked Keenum's throws in this game. I tracked his throws in the previous game. I actually stopped at halftime of this game because it just stopped mattering. I was just like, well, the Vikings continue to only run the ball except on 3rd and long, and the Bengals continue to choose not to play football. I'm not going to, ding or praise Keenum for anything that happens in the third quarter, because that would be unfair to anybody. And so, Keenum might have made some good throws, some bad throws. I didn't log them. I watched them. But in the first half, he made more negative plays than he made positive ones. Both sacks that he took, I think, were his fault, which I think is really funny because he was under a lot of pressure in that game that wasn't his fault, and he got out of those, right? And so those looked good. And so he got positive plays for avoiding pressure and negative plays for stepping into pressure. Both, I think, were Geno Atkins sacks, I want to say.
They were both Geno Atkins sacks, and I just assumed that, like, Geno was his kryptonite, like he's the kryptonite to Tampa Bay.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Like, oh, God, Geno's coming. I'm just going to fall.
Yeah, and so Geno Smith absolutely destroys Elflein, and so obviously, credit to Geno Smith. But, that was not a non-obvious thing that occurred on that play. Like, no. Keenum should have seen that and should have moved. And then the second one, he steps up in the pocket to avoid. It looks like he's trying to avoid pressure. Basically, it's an unnecessary move. It's fine until he steps into Geno Atkins, who at that point is being blocked in essence by Mike Remmers. Mike Remmers had a poor game, which sucks because, the Bengals defense wasn't trying. Rashad Hill struggled a lot. I thought he did well, and then on the rewatch, he actually struggled quite a bit. And Elflein was actually pretty good. He had some really bad moments, some really good moments. And so those are some pretty good takeaways. But, Keenum steps into a couple of sacks. He nearly throws an interception, almost identical to the interception that he actually threw last week. And he takes small plays instead of big ones and all that. What I found interesting is that in this game, Keenum ranks 32nd of all quarterbacks for Week 15. 32nd of all quarterbacks in percentage of yards that came through the air. So he relied on yards after the catch a ton in this game. And I was like, well, that makes sense based off of what I've seen. So he ranks last out of all quarterbacks in that statistic. And I was like, well, that's not necessarily like a knock, but it is an indication that the statistics that he had accrued are probably not a good representation of who he was as a player in that game. And so I looked over the past 4 weeks, and he ranks 34th. So third to last. So 34th of I guess 37 or 38 quarterbacks. Something like third to last of all quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks in percentage yards that come from yards in the air. And that I think is interesting because that I think tells us that the game plans have been really conservative over the past 4 weeks, which has been fair. I think against Atlanta, it made a lot of sense based off of the coverage of their defense. Against the Bengals, it makes a lot of sense because they're not trying and you're already up and you're essentially trying to run the ball anyway and all that. But it also means these statistics over the past 4 games where I think he's the top 4 in passer rating are just not good representations of who he is as a player because an unlikely amount come after the catch. So for me, generally when it comes to percentage of yards in the air, percentage of yards after the catch, the rule is usually if you're at an extreme in either direction, that's not a good thing. Unless you're in a super deep passing offense, it's not a good thing. If you really kind of want to be in the middle to the upper middle, depending on kind of what your offense is. If it's a deeper passing offense, then it's okay to have a lower percentage come after the catch. But the extremes are bad because that tells you that the extremes are bad for letting us know what those statistics mean. Because that could tell us that you've got a really poor supporting cast and they can't generate yards after the catch, or it could tell us that you're not leading receivers, or it could tell us you're overly reliant on a supporting cast. It could tell us a lot of things, and you kind of have to interpret that data going forward. And in this case, I think the proper interpretation is the Vikings have been playing really conservative game plans, and though there have been some really good throws in there, like that Diggs throw, he hasn't actually been doing all of that much or contributing that much to those gaudy passing statistics. And I think he's been playing poorly, and people are getting kind of on my shit about it. And I get it. Like, in the Panthers game, for example, like, he wasn't getting a ton of help either. A bunch of people were saying, there was a ton of pressure in that game, and that's true. There were 5 drops in that game, and that's true. We talked about that last week. So he wasn't getting much of help in that game, but that doesn't mean he was playing well either.
Right.
So, whatever. Keenum did fine in the game in terms of what was asked of him. He played poorly, but that didn't matter because the game plan did not dictate that he needed to play well. And also the Vikings were like up 17-0 by the end of the first quarter. So, he doesn't need to play well.
No, he was put in a position where the defense just needed to hold off and just take what the Bengals defense was going to give him. And they took it, and they took it to what? It was just ridiculous. It felt like we were clicking on all cylinders for a little while, even with the doink in kick.
Yeah, right, that was pretty funny. That's another good throw. This is
why we can't have nice things.
It isn't. It felt like that was going to go out, but that was a 52-yarder, right?
Yeah.
That was actually another good throw. It was 3rd and 19 or 3rd and 28 or whatever. It was 3rd and super long. You're probably not going to convert it. And Keenum throws a good pass to Rudolph in order to get that into field goal range. Kai Forbath almost does not pay that back with the doink. It just really felt like, come on, man. You're just trolling us now. What is this?
I just assume that he spends most of his practice time just trying to doink them in now, because this is either the second or the third time we've seen it this year. Right. So I just assume that he's spending most of his time in practice. I wonder, anybody can hit between the uprights. I want to be known as the guy who hits the bank shot in. Let's talk about the defense real quick. And Andy Dalton was just making some poor life choices in this game. A lot of it had to do with ball placement, especially with the Terrence Newman interception, where instead of going to the outside of the receiver, he went inside, and where Newman just happened to be.
Yeah. So first of all, Newman just had an amazing game.
Do we re-sign him next year?
It really depends on if he retires, right? Like that's the
well, there's lots of players that do the whole like I'm playing this year to get a ring when they're at the end of their rope, like end of their season career, whatever. If that were not to happen to him, if he does not get a ring this year, and he would agree to be playing this next year, would we take him on?
I think
we're not paying him a whole lot of money.
Right, and he's okay with a reduced role. He's not like demanding every snap or anything like that.
Right.
In fact, this is kind of funny. Somewhat similar situation occurred with Antoine Winfield. Before the Vikings, I thought they did him dirty. I thought they treated him wrong. But before that, the Vikings re-signed him under the expectation that he wouldn't be playing too many snaps. And he complained that he was playing too many snaps because that's not what they agreed to. And of course, like the reason was because the Vikings cornerbacks were not only getting injured, but also were bad. And they're like, you got to be out there. You're good. They're not. That's it. And then he got a huge contract escalator, but then he got cut, which that just sucks. I hate that. But it could be a similar situation where they sign Newman on and give him essentially. It's tough because most of your escalators don't kick in until next year. But you can get this year contract bonuses for playing a certain number of snaps. So they could do that and sign him on with the expectation that he'll play like fewer than 500 snaps. And maybe he would agree to that. I mean, it can't be like if you're 40, that can't feel good. Can it? Like
you don't see him complaining, although the picture that was taken of him after the win this Sunday with him having a massive frown on his face. while everyone else is smiling just like an idiot. It's like you that was the very definition of just too old for this crap.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I would imagine he may agree to something like a reduced role, reduced snap count, maybe even a veteran minimum. But I mean, he's just such good depth to have. And obviously he's an amazing veteran presence to have. And you see all these stories leak out about like how impactful he's been. Like there's a story, there's a couple of stories. There's one at 1500 ESPN about how Teddy Bridgewater leaned on Terrence Newman a ton. There's one, I think, at Zone Coverage that Sam Ekstrom wrote. If not, Matthew Call wrote it at 1500 ESPN. We'll put these in the show notes. I'll find the actual places for them, about how Terrence Newman really helped out an undrafted free agent cornerback, Sam Brown, in like a really huge way. It's actually a really good story. And you know, there's a ton of stories about just how important he's been to helping people out, just kind of around the team and stuff like that. And unlike sort of my takes on Chad Greenway from a couple of years ago, him being on the field has been like a good thing, right? And so having that plus his leadership skills is a huge boon. And so it would just make a ton of sense to see if you can sign him on. And if you can't, ask him about a coaching position, because it kind of sounds like he would be interested in that too.
Yeah, there'd been some talk about that earlier in the season, that was something that he was wanting to do, and he clearly enjoys working with Zimmer, so it would make sense to keep him around anyway. But he was playing lights out, and it was no accident that he was in the right place at the right time for that interception.
No, for sure. Like you said, really poor ball placement from Andy Dalton. In fact, to some degree, you know, looked like the intended receiver.
Looked like the intended receiver was Terrence Newman.
Yeah, right. And it was like, hit him right in the numbers, man. Good job. And, you know, Newman kind of corralled it in. But yeah.
He looked like he was, not to interrupt you, sorry, but it looked like he was almost like, in order to catch the ball, that he was like going between his legs like a Harlem Globetrotter would with a basketball.
Yeah,
that was
really
great.
Funny. I should include that video in the show notes too, because that one's just good. But yeah, there's that, and then also I think really early in the game, like, you know, in the first 3 plays of the game, he got a fantastic pass deflection on like 3rd and short or something like that. And it just like popped right up, and it was just like, I'm here to play. Like, it was really good. And he got another really good pass deflection on a slant too. He had an outstanding game. And of course, the other guy who got an interception, Eric Kendricks, got a pick 6. Mm-hmm. Was there only 2 interceptions?
There were 2 interceptions in the game for the Vikings.
Right. Which, yeah, okay. It felt like there could have been more, and I didn't know about them. But like, yeah, Eric Kendricks' pick 6 was great, and he had a good game. His first play was bad. The rest of his plays were good. And that was pretty phenomenal. Linval Joseph had an astounding game, had like 3 to 5 stops behind the line of scrimmage, had a couple of pressures. Tom Johnson had an okay game. Those penalties really hurt, and that's something we should talk about in a little bit too. The penalties pretty hurt a little bit, but, you know, he was able to get pressure, and he got a couple of stops in the backfield, just not something that, you know, he's well known for. Everson Griffin and Daniel Hunter both had a ton of pressure. Brian Robinson obviously had a ton of pressure. He had 2 sacks along with Hunter's 1. But Hunter and Griffin also did a really, really good job in the run game. It was really up to that defensive line. I thought Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks did fine, but that defensive line did just a fantastic job of holding those running backs back. I think after the first half, Giovanni Bernard had 1.8 yards per carry. So, you know, I think a lot of that has to do with the defensive line. So really astounding defensive performance.
Yeah.
Harrison Smith could have had better games, I guess. I don't want to criticize him too much. I only noticed like 1 big mistake. So it's not like he sucked or anything, but he also didn't make that many plays. He's a safety. Sometimes he doesn't make that many plays. He definitely made at least 1 big splash play that I can remember off the top of my head. And he made 1 pretty big mistake off the top of my head. That's it. So, yeah. And yeah, the defensive backs just in general were pretty good though. So really good, outstanding performance all around from the defense.
It was fun to watch the defense just swarm that offensive line. But you're right. Let's talk about the penalties for just a moment, especially on offense as well. As was noted in, I was listening to Paul Allen for a little while because I was having to work for a little bit on Sunday, and I was having to listen to Paul Allen for a bit. And after listening to him and then watching the game footage, it was clear that the only people that were able to stop the Vikings were the Vikings. This game, like there was just, we were doing really, really well until there was a holding penalty or until there was some just stupid penalty that was bringing us back.
Yeah, 11 penalties in the game for the Vikings, and this has been somewhat of a persistent theme
the last couple
for the
games
season.
Now.
Yeah, the Vikings. I should look up the numbers on this season, but 2014, 2015, 2016 were among the league leaders in having the fewest penalties per game or penalties per play, or however you want to measure it. They did not get many penalties in those 3 seasons under Zimmer, and this year it definitely feels a lot different, where they're getting a ton of penalties. The past couple of games for sure, and this game is a good example of it, where they got 11 penalties, and I'm sure 1 or 2 were declined as well. But like you mentioned, the offensive line holding penalties and a false start penalty. I want to say 4 or 5 holding penalties and false starts on the offensive line alone. They were responsible maybe for almost half of the penalties the Vikings committed in that game, which that's troublesome. And that includes like the encroachment by Tom Johnson and a holding penalty on, was it Xavier Rhodes or Terrence Newman maybe? So a couple of defensive penalties, and then like the offensive line, like that's what it was, and that's pretty bothersome, especially because you could say maybe the offensive line was the only unit that didn't perform well throughout the game. Like I mentioned, Remmers and Hill were having a rough go of it. Berger, I think, maybe even had a penalty and had some rough snaps against Geno Atkins, who is playing lights out this year, like one of the best defensive tackles near Aaron Donald level. But Berger had issues. Easton had a really bad game just in general. And Elflin was up and down. So the offensive line, that's kind of an area where you can say, hey, we've got this one area where, it makes sense to take a look at their performance and see, what can improve. Those penalties are a real killer. And, against tougher opponents, that's going to be that's going to be pretty annoying. And, it's kind of interesting, right? Like, would you rather that the Vikings, because I mean, Bengals, Aaron Rodgers-less Packers, let's say they don't have Aaron Rodgers in this game, and then the Bears. Would you rather the Vikings actually have a tough opponent and face the prospect that the Vikings don't win, or are you okay having 3 soft opponents and then a bye before going up against one of the best teams in the NFL in the playoffs? Like, I feel like that could be a thing.
Yeah, it really gives you the question of whether or not you want momentum going into it, or if you want to just be able to ease out of the division, or just ease out of the season. So it's tough, but if you're gonna get the bye afterwards, I would think you'd want to end strong.
Right, against a tougher opponent.
Yeah, like if the Carolina game, for example, would have been the last game of the season, it can't be because they're not in our division. But if it was a Packers team with Aaron Rodgers as the last week for the last week of the season, I would want that just to kind of do like a final test. And even if we're in a position where we don't need the win, we at least have like a real test on our hands, and then we can move on to the playoffs.
Right. Yeah. And, I'm not a huge game-to-game momentum guy. I'm not a huge, we have evidence that there's a loss of focus. But it's certainly, I think, worth discussing. And even if we can't measure it, it's certainly worth considering 3 soft games, including the Bengals, where the other team just quit. And then a bye. That's a month without playing a team that of the caliber that you're going to go up against. And so that's maybe a concern. It's probably not as big a concern for the Vikings as it should be for the Eagles, who have had a really easy schedule this season.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Rams are coming. The Rams are at the gate. Like, this is either it's going to be the Vikings or it's going to be the Eagles that are going to end up seeing them. But that Rams team is starting to get scary. And despite the fact that we've beaten them head to head, and they are being consistently ranked above us for different reasons, that team is coming. And if you're playing some powder puff teams to end the season, you are not prepared for what is coming like directly at you.
Right. So, that's a concern. Obviously, I'm happy that the Vikings are probably going to win the next 2 games, and that'll help secure that first round bye. Whereas if, one of those games is tougher, you don't know, or rather you don't have as reasonable an assurance that they're going to get that first round bye. So I'm happy that they have it. And, I feel like this is a team that if there are lessons to be learned from, the 5-0 thing or from the loss against the Panthers, then maybe they've learned those lessons and they'll focus kind of regardless. But I think it's still a worry kind of going. Like, it's probably not a big deal, but it's a worry.
Here's some stats for you, because I've been working on this while you were talking. So far this season, the Vikings have had 929 yards of penalties against us, as opposed to last year, where we were one of the league's lowest offenders with 882 penalties.
Oh, and so the Vikings still have 2 games to go to build on the 960, you said?
929, yeah. So, yeah, it's certainly not great. However, if we looked at 2015 as well, just because we have it, it was 843. So we're already well above the last 2 years anyway.
Yeah.
So, penalties aside, we get to talk about something that we've been waiting for a little while now, about a year and a half. And we can legitimately answer the question that we are tired of being asked. How did Teddy look?
He looked not good.
He looked excited. The whole place exploded when he went onto the field. Like, that was a fun moment. Despite anyone's feelings as to whether or not Teddy should be starting over Case Keenum or whatever, that was just a fun moment to see. That was really really cool.
Absolutely. It was emotional. It was incredible. It was the culmination of. It seems like an impossible journey, right? Because his leg had nearly dislocated. He could have died. Yeah. Which, sounds like an exaggeration coming from a fan, but it's not. Like, if he had not been as well attended as he had been by Eric Sugarman as quickly as he had been, and if the ambulance hadn't arrived as quickly as it had, he could have died.
Yeah. And just seeing him go back out onto the field was just like amazing. Like, and before we go really in depth on this, Arif and I did discuss this before the show, and we did a lot of searching as to when the last time a Vikings quarterback sat for like the fourth quarter in order for the second string quarterback to come out. And it turns out we figured out the last 2 of them. The last 2 times this has happened, one was against the Giants, December 27th, 2015. And then back in the 2009 season, T-Jack did it against the Bengals at home in Minnesota, December 13th.
Something about them Bengals.
I know, right? I was at that game. That was a fun just beat down, and I believe Favre sat down in like the very beginning of the fourth quarter, and they just sent T-Jack out to start kneeling, just be done with us.
It's funny. We were looking up. What other times has occurred? So there are times when players have been benched in blowouts, but the Vikings were not the ones doing the blowouts.
No.
But there was also, I was like, oh, Joe Webb has had actually kind of a lot of, passes and game appearances, and James and I were like, yeah, but I mean, they used him in packages a lot, so maybe. And I was like, okay, well, I'll go through a game by game and see kind of what happens. And so I was like, oh, 2011 he comes in, 2013 he comes in, he's got a game against Washington. Did the Vikings won that game? Is it because, or Matt Castle's in, against Washington? Is it because the Vikings were blowing out, Washington? They won 34-27. I looked through the game log, and Ponder's playing the first 3 quarters, and it's like, oh, that looks good. And then I look at the score, and it's 28-27, and I was like, oh, the Vikings were not blowing them out.
No.
And Castle takes the first snap of the next quarter, and I'm just like, oh, wait.
There was a lot of reliving of Ponder injuries there for about 10 minutes. We're going like...
He got injured a ton.
In Washington,
But he got injured a ton. Yeah, especially against Washington. Got a shoulder injury, a rib injury, a concussion against Washington, just specifically. So that was cool. We got to see all the times he got injured. And all the times the Vikings decided to play someone else when they got blown out.
Yeah.
Like a 41-13 loss to the Seahawks, where, by the way, 10 of those Vikings points came in the fourth quarter. So, whatever.
Just that. But it's just cool to see that this Vikings team was able to pull that off late in the season, was able to do a bit of a blowout, and then be able to have their second string quarterback play. So let's talk about Case Keenum's replacement during the game, a young upstart named Teddy Bridgewater. And that first pass looked a little bit jumpy, and that turned into an interception, which turned into points.
Right. So, if you were to parse out blame for the interception, he doesn't get a ton of that blame, right? But he didn't look good, right? Because he
didn't
looked
make it
skittish.
Easy.
Right? Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, he certainly didn't make it easy. He looked skittish. He looked undecisive in the pocket. It's all of the leeway in the world, right? I mean, you're up 10, 20 points, whatever. The game's, over. They've already quit. And you can give him all the leeway in the world. He's back in his first game action in 2 years. And so, it's a low stakes game where he doesn't have to be, calm under pressure. And, it's the culmination of this incredible emotional journey. And he can't hear the play call because everyone's shouting. So all the leeway in the world. But, you break it down. He didn't look all that good. He throws a high pass to Jerick McKinnon. McKinnon doesn't, corral it in. It's, I think, McKinnon's first drop of the day. And it pops up and it's an interception. And so you're like, well, crap. And then the next drive, run, pass to Michael Floyd, drop. So
Michael Floyd looked so confused to be getting that ball.
Yeah, right. He's like, why? We didn't agree to this.
I need more tea to be able to do this. I'm confused.
Yeah, I gotta get a more probiotic atmosphere for me to haul those in.
God, was it you or was it Ted that made some comment about? It must have been Ted that made some comment about there was some extra zip on that, which is why Michael Floyd couldn't catch that, and people were just freaking out.
Yeah, I saw that. I think that was Ted. But yeah, that was.
You think it was Ted? You don't remember your trolling on Twitter? I forget.
Yeah, right. It's only serious tweets for me. It's a professional account. But yeah, 2 throws, 2 drops. So he goes 0 for 2 with an interception, but neither of those are probably his fault. And people got on my case about this one too. It's, first of all, who cares, right? People are so I tweeted out, who cares? Because I really don't care how Teddy looked over the sample of 2 throws in his first game action. And someone was like, well, you cared last week when you were arguing that Case threw this interception. And I was like, yeah, I cared then because Case is the quarterback and I want him to do well and he's not doing well. But people were like, well, if you blame Case Keenum for the interception that was thrown, high to Diggs, why wouldn't you blame Teddy for this pass that was thrown high to Jerick McKinnon? And it's like, yeah, it's not like there's it's a high throw. That's it. Yes, no. It's there's obviously there's a galaxy of difference. Diggs had to use his full vertical extension and get his arms all the way up there and get his fingertips on the ball. That was an insanely inaccurate throw. There's no reason for it to be that inaccurate. That's ridiculous. The throw to McKinnon was above his eyes. That's the difference. He didn't have to jump up to get it, and he didn't have to, go through a full extension, and he didn't have to play volleyball with it like Diggs did. And so, it was a poorly placed throw, whatever. But in this case, it's easier to say, yeah, his teammates didn't help him. But, whatever, right? Teddy's back. That's great. That's amazing news.
Yeah.
And I can revel in it and bathe in it and whatever. It's fine. Hopefully, if the Vikings ever need him, he'll have kind of worked out those kinks, and that's kind of the key there. Because the reports are that he looks amazing in practice, but that's not enough, right? Game action is going to be key, and so hopefully, maybe against the Bears, and the Bears game is going to matter unless the Eagles, I think, win the next game and the Vikings win. If the Vikings win and the Eagles win, I think there's a chance if the Saints and if the Panthers lose. Sorry, the Vikings win, the Eagles win, and the Panthers lose. There's a chance that this Bears game doesn't matter. In fact, I'm almost sure that the Bears game doesn't matter.
Yeah, at some point, this turns into the scene from the movie Basketball where they're talking about the playoff scenarios.
Yeah, right.
Where if it turns out both the Eagles and the Vikings end up winning out, then we will just have sack races on consecutive Sundays until a winner is crowned.
Right. Man, it's been a while since I watched that movie. It's been a while. Trey Parker, Matt Stone. Oh, geez.
That movie is fantastic and does manage to, especially with the touchdown. It's super relevant now thanks to the touchdown dance
the touchdown
rules.
dance. Yeah.
I just want to see river dancing in the NFL again.
They had that though. They did. With the Lions, I think.
God, I don't even. Let's not look this up.
Okay, but yeah, and so the Vikings win, the Eagles win, the Panthers lose. Good chance that the Bears game is relevant to seeding, because the Vikings are probably locked into that 2 seed. And if that's the case, then Teddy could play the entire game and maybe work out sort of that rust, and that would be cool. And then we're kind of in a better spot if the Vikings do need him in the playoffs. So that's cool. I'm super glad that they don't have to rely on Kyle Sluter,
despite Dusty's love of him.
Right? Yeah, and they can put Bridgewater in there. Obviously, Keenum's the starter for the rest of the season. I'm worried about it because I don't actually think he's been playing well despite these pretty good statistics. But whatever. I'm really happy that Teddy is healthy enough to play and that he got to play. I mean, it's for him, it's just like fulfilling a dream that he didn't know he needed to have, 3 years ago.
Yeah. So that was really cool to see. Was a super moving moment in sports. And it was the fact that it was able to be able to happen at home was both a blessing and a curse, because it was amazing to watch. And then you could see the signs up on the Jumbotron or whatever saying, silence offense at work. And no one was paying attention to that. Yeah, right, everyone just wanted to cheer their lungs out. So we can go to the mailbag, and we've got a great question from Sheldon Hofer to start us out. Who do you guys think has been the most underrated player this year? I mean, I think we all know the defense is full of stars and our offense is playing well, but is there someone you feel is flying under the radar and having a huge impact for this team?
It depends on under the radar for who, because I think nationally, Linval Joseph still doesn't get enough credit. He's the second or third best player on the defense, but I think he may be the most important player for the defense. And so, Harrison Smith and Everson Griffin may be more talented and better players at their positions, but Linval Joseph, I think, is maybe more important despite playing fewer snaps. So nationally, I would say Linval Joseph, but I think Vikings fans are kind of very familiar with how important he is, and certainly he's not flying under the radar for them. So for Vikings fans, that was a little bit tougher. You could maybe go with Latavius Murray, who's been playing kind of well, but doesn't have the statistics. And I know Vikings fans kind of wanted to be done with him after the first couple of games of the season. And, that's, really not fair anymore. But I feel like Vikings fans have kind of appropriately appreciated what that running game has done. I think they're maybe overrating Pat Elflein. I think Riley Reif has been solid, but I don't want to say he's gone under the radar because he hasn't. I don't think he's playing up to his contract, and we're not mad about that or anything like that. But he's had some moments where he's struggled, and then of course, some games where he's not playing. Mike Remmers has been up and down, so maybe Joe Berger. I know Diggs and Thielen are getting enough credit from Vikings fans. Diggs has dropped off statistically, but everyone knows that he's playing really well. He's always open. The ball getting thrown to him is almost always a good thing. CJ Ham is getting a lot of love, and he's playing all right.
People are even going out and buying his jersey.
Yeah. So that's a thing. I would go with Joe Berger. He's not playing as well as he did last year, and last year he didn't play as well as he did the year before, where he's playing at kind of a near elite level. But this year he's playing well. He might even be the best player on that offensive line. And so we all talk about how the revival of the offensive line has been a really big part of the Vikings offensive revival this season. And so it makes sense to credit the guy who's actually probably the best player on that offensive line and who no one has talked about. People have talked about Remmers, they've talked about Reif, and they've talked about Elflein. Less Easton, but still. But they haven't been talking about Berger. So I'll say for Vikings fans it's Berger, and nationally it's Linval.
Question about Latavius Murray. for a moment. Do you feel like he's not getting the credit that he deserves because we had McKinnon on the staff or on the team last year, so we knew what to expect and we had seen good things from him? Is it sort of like a confirmation bias sort of thing? Like, oh, we know that he's already good. We already know McKinnon's good. He's the reason why the running game is good.
Oh, yeah, I think that's maybe part of it, but I don't think people were particularly impressed with McKinnon last year, despite the fact that in the last 4 games last year, he was actually quite good. I think people thought he was bad, and I think people were willing to see McKinnon go. So I don't think it was a thing where, well, we know McKinnon's good, but we need Murray to prove himself in the first couple of games. He didn't. I don't think that's it. I think that people had. I think the lack of expectation for Murray actually hurt Murray more because they expected him to play like a starting running back, and he didn't right away. I don't mean that he didn't start right away, but he didn't play like a starting running back right away. But I don't think that's affiliated with McKinnon. People didn't like McKinnon at the beginning of the year either, and I think a lot of that was built off of last year, and they were carrying that with them too. So I wouldn't say that that's the reason, but I do think that Murray wasn't getting a fair shake because there were some expectations about how he would play, and in limited sample, he wasn't playing well.
Oh, yeah. The fact that he was signed and then immediately had to have surgery.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That didn't help things. Yeah.
Let me toss 2 names out at you for this question, and just want to kind of gauge your opinion on it. Eric Kendricks.
Yeah, I've been fighting about Eric Kendricks on Twitter, and it's weird because I like him. I think he's a good player. I think he's one of the better players in the Vikings defense, and if he plays to his full potential, the Vikings defense is very, very difficult to stop. I think that this year he's been playing pretty poorly, especially relative to himself, where he's been missing a lot of people in coverage, where he's missed some tackles and so on. In the game, he played brilliantly. I mean, the first play was like whatever, and then the rest of the plays he played really well. Yeah, I mean, those are my thoughts. I don't think it's like a Chad Greenway thing, right? Where like everyone's like, well, he's the tackle leader, and now you hate the tackle leader. And it's just like Chad Greenway. It's like, no, Chad Greenway was playing poorly for years. And you
can't see it, but I am doing the facepalm thing.
Right. And Kendricks is a guy that I just think is good, and he just happens to not be playing up to the level. He's had some other good games this year too. It's not like this is his first good game of the season. He's had some good games, and I think he's a good player.
Can we at least have you say Eric Kendricks is good at football? Can we just have
Eric Kendricks is good at football?
There. Okay.
He's a Pro Bowl quality player. Should have gone to the Pro Bowl last year.
What about, for the answer to this question, what about Terrence Newman?
I mean, he's good.
I'm not saying whether or not he's good. I'm just saying whether or not he would qualify as kind of being an underrated player on the team.
Not really. I just feel like he hasn't been playing enough snaps for him to be like the fact that he's kind of washed out in terms of coverage of the team, and only kind of, reflects his snap count. Like obviously in this game he had to play every snap because Mackenzie Alexander was injured, but in a lot of games he's playing like half the snaps. He plays a lot of first and second down stuff because he contributes a little bit more run defense than Alexander does. But for the most part, it makes sense that he's kind of washed out. So I wouldn't count him.
Let's go on to our next question, which is from Luke Braun, who asks, I haven't heard much from Barr, good or bad. Is he still contributing at a high level like we all assume he is?
Yeah, but not to the level that he was near the beginning of the season. He was playing really, really well at the beginning of the season. Now he's playing pretty well. That doesn't suck. So I'll take it. He's blitzing a little bit more now than he was before. And he's not doing as hot on those blitzes as he was in previous seasons. But, for the most part, he's playing pretty well. And in coverage is kind of where it shows up. And unfortunately, a lot of times you've got a good linebacker in coverage and they don't get interceptions. You don't get that much credit for it because they're not throwing it your way. But they don't tend to throw it Barr's way. And he's been playing well. So, he hasn't been getting a bunch of coverage either. I wouldn't say that he's playing kind of lights out or anything like that, nor is he playing like he did at the beginning of the season or obviously 2 years ago or anything like that. But he's playing well. Yeah.
Who had the worst day on Sunday?
On the Vikings?
Yes.
Probably Mike Remmers. I want to say, followed by Rashad Hill. They were not good.
Next question is from Kenneth Allen, who asks, we've surrendered a lot of sacks in the last few games compared to the first 8 weeks or so. How much of that is on the line, like injuries, and how much of it is on Case? It seemed like he ran into a couple on Sunday. What do you think?
Yeah, the thing is, I think Case is still doing a good job of avoiding or of preventing pressure from turning into sacks. I just think he's not doing as good a job of it. And I think we may have talked about it on this show. Yeah, we must have talked about it on this show. I know I've talked about it on the Football Machine. But one of the things I mentioned was Case is unusually good at preventing pressure from turning into sacks. But he is statistically so far ahead of the rest of the NFL that there's no chance that he's as good as those statistics show. And so he's going to regress towards his mean.
Yep,
that doesn't mean he's going to – right, okay, yeah. So that doesn't mean he's going to regress to the NFL mean. He's going to regress to whatever his mean is, which I suspect is fairly high. But this is what it looks like. He's still doing a good job of avoiding sacks from pressure. He's still doing a good job of it. He's just doing less of a good job. And sometimes he actually is running into pressure. But like I mentioned, both of the sacks in this game, were his fault. But he still prevented probably more sacks than he created. So, yeah, he's still doing it. This is just kind of what that regression looks like. So I guess, chalk one up to Norse Code for predicting that.
It's a secret to the game. Norse Code is a secret to the game. So
yeah, right. Yeah, it was a key to the game. So yeah, I mean, but he's still doing well. So yeah, that's what it looks like.
Next question we have coming up here is from Kyle Slabby, who asks a bit of a moral question. Is it wrong to use questionable methods to take down criminals if they are objectively evil? And if so, can someone please do that to Tom Brady? Assuming we can objectively qualify things as good or evil. But I suppose that's a discussion for another day.
So is it morally, well, it would be, so is it morally almost required of us, right?
Yeah, it's the idea of, of what's what I'm looking for. It's just justifying the means sort of thing.
Sure. So objectively bad people like Tom Brady.
I wanted you to say Chad Greenway there for a moment. Sorry.
Chad Greenway is a good person who's on the football field for just a little bit too long. That's all I want to say about that. But
just not good at football.
He just wasn't. He had some good plays. That pick six.
That pick six at the game we went to. Yeah, that was pretty sweet. That was quite the birthday gift.
He made sure to rub that in my face too.
Vikings Twitter can be just the dumbest thing on the planet some days, but there are moments.
That was amazing.
there certainly are moments. I believe the thing from last year was Vikings Twitter is a lot like North Korea in that you must give it respect.
All right, so I think it is morally incumbent upon the Vikings to take out Tom Brady. Yes. Does that mean killing him? Probably not. Does it mean hurting him? I wouldn't say that because I'm a professional.
No, of course not. Not even if you set up several satellite Twitter accounts and just, had those going as bots for a little while. You still wouldn't say that. You are professional.
Yeah. Arif Kevin Durant Hassan.
I knew it. Also from Kyle Slabby, do each one of us perceive colors differently? Specifically, does the color I associate as red look the same to James as it does to Arif? Or is my red the same as your blue, but we all call it the same shade red, meaning we're looking at a different color, but not?
So I saw a video on this a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh, I know the answer to this. And then I tried remembering the video, and I was like, oh, I don't actually remember the answer to this.
And sitting and watching a 9-minute video didn't seem like a decent idea for pre-show stuff.
Yeah, right. So before the show, I'm like, well, let's pull up this video. It's 9 minutes. Never mind. I don't remember the answer. I think the answer to the video is, I guess we won't know, which is super unsatisfying. But anyway, I'll link that video in the show notes. It's from Vsauce. So a bunch of people watch that channel. So I'm sure some people who listen to the show probably watch that channel, so they know what I'm talking about. But is all of that experientially the same? I want to say yes. I think it is. Because I think just that's how the science of rods and cones work. And I think that, our brains only work kind of in very similar directions, even though each brain is like very unique in a bunch of ways. That's not, I don't mean like snowflake unique. I mean like genetically and biologically unique.
Why can't it be both?
Why can't it be both? But I just think that it just seems likely to me. So my girlfriend's like an evolutionary biologist, and so she would know. I'm just a dude.
Well, that's funny that you bring that up, because there have been studies, scientific studies done that show that women see more of the spectrum of color than men do, which leads to that stupid argument over, do you like this color? And the guy goes, well, it's the same color as the two you just showed me. And no, it's a slightly different shade of. Like, it turns out scientifically that is a real thing. So it would be, if say Arif was a woman, you could actually say, which I feel like that's a show title, if Arif were a woman, Arif and I may be seeing a different shade or a different color, but despite by looking at the exact same thing.
Well, so this is interesting. So my girlfriend just read a book called Testosterone Rex. It's about evolutionary biology in the context of women versus men. And that thing about the different shades, so that's been proven multiple times in studies, but it hasn't been proven that that's a genetic thing, because all of the studies are colored by the fact that women have grown up in a society where women are expected to be, the fashion people or the artsy people or the decorative people. And so they've been trained to see more shades. But I just think so. The history of color is so cool. Blue was the last color that humans identified across multiple cultures. There's a really good Radiolab, I think it's Radiolab, episode about all of these colors, and how even in some societies, the differences, so for example, Russians have a different shade of blue, a sky blue, that they recognize as a distinct color from blue, kind of like how we see pink as different than red, and maybe they would call it light red. And so they do a better job of differentiating different shades of light blue, and people who grew up in the United States do a better job of differentiating the shades of red versus light red, and that's a product of cultural conditioning. So I think maybe that's the same thing, but who knows? It's so cool. I don't know. Colors are cool. We'll link some podcasts about color.
Next question is from Sam Wagner, who asks, how important is home field advantage for Minnesota? Do you believe this team could travel to New Orleans, Philly, or Carolina and win the NFC Championship?
Yeah, it's a good team. I think they could. I think it's immensely difficult because it's a 6-point swing. And that's nothing to say about the individual effects. It really feels like New Orleans is much more of a home team, for example, than the average NFL team, like then say the Dolphins, who for a certain stretch of time were actually better on the road. But it's on average, it's a 6-point swing. I imagine it's more important maybe for New Orleans than it is for Carolina or Philadelphia. But I want to take sort of every point you can get. The Vikings this year have been playing pretty well at home. Which, I mean, they've been playing pretty well, so, huge distinction. But, I think it's really important. And I think winning these two games, shifts the odds in the Vikings' favor. If they were 50-50 games, which they're not, I think the Vikings are a better team than all of those teams, especially with Nick Foles at quarterback. Because I think the Vikings are a better team, shifting those odds from if they were 50-50 to like 58-42 to now, if the Vikings are a genuinely better team and should win 60% of their games against those teams, then it goes from 60-40 to 65-35 or 68-32. That's massive. So I think home field advantage is really important, which everyone says that, but hopefully quantifying that difference helped out.
I was gonna say it wasn't one of those situations where it was like 3rd and long really favors the defense.
Yeah, 3rd and long is a huge advantage for the defense,
as it turns out.
Thanks, CD.
Let's go to our final question, which is from Nick Olson, who asks, which playoff teams do you think we match up against best or worst? So there are. Let's look at
every playoff team that I care about is complete. Like, they're all good in a lot of ways, which I want to stress is unusual.
Yeah.
Because most teams in most years in the playoffs are advantage one, and in the AFC it's totally not like that at all, right? Like, the Patriots are just weak on defense. They've been getting a lot better, but they've been weak on defense.
Certainly weren't getting better this last game.
Oh, yeah, they weren't. I'm not going to say that impacted me or anything like that, but I did not appreciate that.
There was a lot of weirdness in that. Weirdness in that particular game. But
Right.
Let's look at the top 9 for just a second. As far as the playoff picture is concerned, we have the Eagles, the Vikings, we have the Rams, Saints, Panthers, and Falcons, and still in the hunt, somehow, in defiance of God's will, we have the Detroit Lions, we have the Seahawks, and we have the Cowboys. The 3 of them at 8 and 6.
I think the Lions may be eliminated now. I don't know.
Nope, they are still somehow alive.
Jesus. God. Go blue? Is that what you say? Good job, Detroit.
Or gray. They seem to be really big into gray right now.
All right. Go gray. This is fantastic news, guys. That's so weird. Okay. So Eagles, no significant weaknesses. I don't think that there's any significant matchup aside from, hey, that quarterback is not the quarterback that you wrote in on. So that is a good matchup in terms of that quarterback potentially throwing to the Vikings defensive backs. I think that that's a decent thing. Their tight end matches up to the Vikings linebackers well. The receivers, I'm a little bit worried maybe because Nelson Aguilar is a slot receiver, and you match him up against Terrence Newman, who obviously has been playing pretty well, but maybe doesn't have the speed to compete, or Mackenzie Alexander's a little bit less experienced. So that one is maybe a concern. Outside receivers, I'm not worried about Alshon Jeffrey versus Xavier Rhodes. Defensively, I'm worried about their defensive line. I'm worried about all of their defensive lines. If it's New Orleans, Cameron Jordan, whatever, right? But I think that that's a big issue. Rams already played them. I think they don't have any significant weaknesses. I don't think the receivers match up well against the Vikings, though. But they do have a little bit more quickness than the Vikings are kind of used to in their secondary. So that's maybe a problem.
If we were going to look at the Rams for just a moment, do you feel like the Rams are now a much better team than they were when we played them?
I think so, if only because I think they've done a better job of playing up to their competition. Because when the Vikings were playing them, they were coming off of a streak of just playing really poorly against good teams and really well against bad teams. And I think they're kind of converging on what that means.
They just needed a good punch in the face.
Yeah. And they got one against the Vikings. They kind of got one against the Eagles. But they played that game a lot closer. And so, I think that maybe they're in a better spot, and they waxed Seattle the second time.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's interesting. The best matchup in that game would be being able to run up the middle and attack those linebackers. Which is not to say, of course, that Michael Brockers is bad or that Aaron Donald, God forbid, is bad or anything like that. But those linebackers are somebody or people that you want to attack both on the ground and in the air. So that's nice. I don't think that there's any uniquely bad matchups except Aaron Donald in that one. Saints, there's a better matchup defensively on the defensive line and their linebacker core. I'd rather run up the middle against them. But they're very difficult to throw on. Offensively, they can do friggin' anything. That's not great. but I think that, I guess if you say, hey, Michael Thomas versus Xavier Rhodes, I'd pick Xavier Rhodes. Brandon Cooks versus, or I guess not Brandon Cooks, Ted Ginn versus Trey Waynes. I guess I'd take Ted Ginn, but not by a mile. They both run fast. They both don't track the ball well. Whatever. That matchup is not as concerning to me, except insofar as they can just do whatever. So if somebody's having an off game, they'll be able to exploit it, and that's kind of more the bigger issue. Maybe that's Anthony Barr's turn to have an off game, right? They'll exploit it. So that is whatever. After that, what is it? You said Seattle, Carolina, Atlanta.
Yep, it looks like it's Saints, Carolina, Atlanta, and Detroit, Seattle. And the Cowboys have a slim chance at making it, but not terribly likely. They could go on a tear right now with Ezekiel Elliott back.
Right. Just in time to miss the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah.
But let's see. Yeah, I don't know. Those are the teams that worry me the most. Carolina, obviously, the Carolina Panthers beat the Vikings, but that game just felt weird. The matchup there that bothers me is Cam Newton versus anybody.
Yeah.
So that's
especially
about that.
If he's going to start tearing it up and start doing like and one mixtapes like he did against Clay Matthews. Going,
that was hilarious.
That was fantastic. That was
show notes.
That was one of those, like, that's easily going to be one of the highlights of the year for any team. It's going, oh, you've been watching a lot of tape, huh? Watch this.
So good.
Enjoy my fake.
Yeah, so I'm worried about the matchup of Cam Newton versus anybody, but defensively, their matchups don't bother me, and offensively, their skill players don't bother me.
And our guest for Carolina was great. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, let's bring him back. Cool.
Let's see if we can be the only podcast who gets him that week, as opposed to like every single Vikings podcast.
Right. That happens some weeks. Seahawks, Russ worries me. Earl Thomas worries. Is Earl Thomas healthy?
That's an excellent question. Not sure. Bobby
Wagner worries me. Maybe the Earl Thomas and Bobby Wagner will keep fighting. I don't have to worry about that. But yeah, matchup wise, there's no like 1-to-1 matchup that bothers me that much there. Bobby Wagner versus Kyle Rudolph would be a problem, or versus Jerick McKinnon. But yeah, it's whatever. So nobody, I think,
in the battle of the kickers for Seattle versus Minnesota.
Right. I would. Oh, that's gonna be fun. But yeah, I don't think anybody exploits a significant weakness of the Vikings any more than other teams do. So I do think that, Philadelphia's defensive line scares me because the offensive line is weak for the Vikings. I do think the Rams' defensive line scares me because the offensive line is weak for the Vikings. I do think, Cameron Jordan and Sheldon Rankin scare me because the offensive line is weak for the Vikings. The Seahawks, I mean, they haven't been producing defensively, but I'm not going to say that their defensive line is not good. It is. Atlanta, they've had moments with that offensive line. Grady Jarrett's playing really well. So maybe they could produce. That could be bothersome. Carolina obviously produced Julius Peppers and Quan Short and whatever. So they produced a lot. So those bother me, but I don't think any one of them bothers me more than the others. I just think that Philadelphia is a better team aside from Nick Foles. I think the Saints are maybe the most dangerous team in the playoffs right now besides the Vikings. The Rams, are good. And so it's just really a rank of who's good because they all beat the Vikings the same way.
Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Again, if you enjoy the show, you can donate to us in 2 different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode and throw us a couple bucks our way, help keep the lights on, help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Do what you got to do with Tree Fitty. Before we go, Arif, do you have anything to plug?
I'm going to be doing another rooting guide. I'll post that. The Case Keenum article that I teased last week, I didn't get done. Might as well fold it into this week because I've got 20 more throws to throw into there, or 20 more plays to throw in there if I include the first half of the Cincinnati game. So we'll see if I get that out this week too.
And just a quick reminder that we will be doing a second show later in the week where we will be discussing the upcoming Christmas Eve game. Is it Christmas Eve? No, it's the Saturday
it's the 23rd. Game. Yeah. I'm actually gonna miss that game. I'll be in the air.
Oh, that's sucks. Right. Yeah, you'll have to catch that after you land. And going out to your brother's again this Christmas.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah. So we will be coming back at you later in the week with Dusty and Arif to discuss the Packers game and try to figure out what's going to end up happening with Aaron Rodgers, if they're going to make that a game time decision and just kind of make us sweat a bit. I get the feeling that McCarthy thinks that's what a good coach would do.
It's a good way to characterize the way that he coaches.
Just reading like a Coaches for Dummies book, like Coaching for Dummies book. I bet sense. Belichick would have done this. I bet Purcell's would have done this too. Okay, let's make this a thing. Also, I get to plug something. Next week, we will be doing our Christmas show in all of its glory. There will be lots of clips, and we will have lots of outtakes and all that sort of jazz. So if there is something that you would like us to include, just send us a quick email, norsecodepodcast@gmail.com, or just send us a quick message on Twitter @NorseCodeDN. Be happy to hear from you, and I will do my best to try to find it. So we'll be going through lots and lots of clips. I have I have literal hours to go through this week and this weekend. So I'm looking forward to it. Most of these shows are pretty funny. They also contain a fair amount of cursing. So I will warn you in the beginning of the episode next week when it gets posted that you might not want the kids to hear this one necessarily, but yeah, Dusty's got a bit of a potty mouth. And apparently so does Arif. So there's that.
I'm sorry.
But anyway, that'll be posted next week, so that'll be a lot of fun. So for Arif, for Dusty, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you later in the week with our Packers preview, and demand excellence. Demand Norse code. And we will see you later this week.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pogachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono, or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, norsecodepodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.
I didn't know who to pull for in the game. Like, I didn't want the Packers to be able to go into the playoffs, but I've got a buddy who's a Detroit Lions fan, and so that I'm going to be seeing soon. Yeah. So I'm whatever. That the only real winner here would be if a frickin' meteoroid just fell and decimated that entire stadium, including John Gruden, who was getting blown that entire fucking show.
Right.
Jesus Christ!
Congrats, you took someone else's team and won the Super Bowl with it.
Congrats on beating a team that was without their Pro Bowl starting center, because the day before the Super Bowl, he was on a bender of sorts, drinking and partying in Tijuana because he thought he had already won the Super Bowl because he was bipolar.
Congrats on having your opponent's game plan memorized.
Yeah,
Good one.
Didn't they say that nothing had changed as far as the names of any plays or the names of schemes? Nothing had changed in that, and Gruden's like, oh, well, if they say this, and then it turned out to be the thing.
Yeah. How ridiculous.
Congratulations at beating Al Davis at his own game.
Tricked him.
God. Speaking of, I should see if the ghost of Al Davis won this week.
Oh yeah, pretty much.
Oh no, we lost. I lost. That's right. Yes, I lost.
Oh.
I lost because Devonta Freeman scored 25 points. That last touchdown, I was like, oh, for fuck's sake. I can't.
You were on track to win.
Yeah. What? I was on track to win, and then that defender decided not to tackle him. And I'm like, oh, fuck you. So that's it.
Amazing.
That's the perfect season. No words. I should have sent a poet.
That's so funny.
This isn't the worst thing that's ever happened to anyone, but I feel like it should be in the top 10 discussion, which is bullshit because I'm winning in both of my other leagues, like, wholeheartedly. This is fucking crap. I'm going to the finals in both of my other leagues.
Oh, so now it's 2 other leagues? Wow.
Well, the one league shouldn't count, but I'm still winning in it.
First time you mentioned this other league, James. I'm sure it's real.
Well, hold on here. Let me just
make up a screenshot and send it to you.
Yeah, well, I just took the screenshot here just a second ago. I think it even has the time on it.
Sure. But you can't Google fantasy screenshots, but those are hard to find on Twitter.
Well, I mean, being the name of the league is kind of specific, and the fact that it's the name is awful and Vikings related, I just want to, point that out. But so in this particular league, everyone auto drafted because the league was supposed to be over. The league was supposed to not exist this year, and because the guy who was running it decided to boycott the NFL until Colin Kaepernick joined a team.
All right.
Yeah, that. So thanks, Dusty. So I like Dusty's message approves nothing, even though he's not on the call. Dusty. So I'm in a league that it was supposed to be transferred over to me, which was fine. And then the guy didn't go and send over any admin tools or list me as commissioner or anything. So he just gave it to me and went, okay, you can run it, and then didn't give me anything. I was like, oh, okay. And there's $500 at stake in this league. So everybody has to pay in a bunch of money. And so I canceled it outright and said, sorry, this is all canceled because I can't do anything. And dude is literally not answering his phone, any text messages, any emails, any Facebook messages at all from me. It's like he wants nothing to do with the NFL. It's like, what the fuck? All right. So everyone auto-drafted. The whole league auto-drafted. And I told everybody, just ignore it, whatever happens this year doesn't happen. If Gabe decides to get off his ass and do whatever, it's fine. We'll whatever happens the years later, we'll figure it out. Okay. So I looked in one day, I was like, I wonder how that auto-drafted league is doing. And it's like, wow, I'm doing fairly well. This is kind of crazy. And most teams like Paul's Garbage Time scoring 56 points right now. That's because Paul, while he has gone 9-4, his team, if I can pull it up here. Oh, that's the screenshot. Thank you. Paul's team has Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Adrian Peterson all on the team, all starting.
Oh, boy.
So it's like it should be. It's a ghost town. Meanwhile, I had Cam Newton, Le'Veon Bell, Kamara, Jerick McKinnon on my team. I did very well for myself in that auto draft, and that one's going great. That one's fine. Or the fucking ESPN league where we do that stupid 2-week rule for a fantasy championship. Have you been a part of a league that does this?
Yeah.
Yep. It's stupid, but I'm beating that guy by literally 100 points. That was the last time I checked. So the total on that one, however, is loading your team and matchup data, 327 to 221.8.
That's pretty substantial.
And I'm going to the championship now in that fucking league. And I couldn't win in my own league for Norse Code. I couldn't. I don't even want to bring it up on the show at this point. I'm actually embarrassed now. This is stupid.
No, we should actually splice this entire conversation into the end of the show.
If you'd like to hear James's real opinion on this whole mess of a fantasy season, check out the after the show clip.